You press the button, half a second of motion, then that aggressive pneumatic whump, and then silence. And if you've ever stood in a cruise ship bathroom wondering what on earth just happened, you are not alone. Because that flush didn't work anything like your toilet at home, not even close. Most people assume it's basically the same mechanism, just louder. Water rushes in, gravity pulls everything down, it disappears somewhere below you. Sensible assumption, and completely wrong. Here's what actually just happened. The toilet in your cabin is connected to a vacuum network, not just your bathroom, every bathroom on the ship. Thousands of fixtures across dozens of decks, all wired into the same pressurized system. The moment you pressed that button, a valve opened and a pressure differential, roughly half the pressure of the atmosphere around you, precisely calibrated for this job, pulled everything through the pipe. No water column doing the work. Almost no water at all, actually. A cruise ship toilet uses around 1 to 1.5 liters per flush. Your toilet at home uses 6 to 9. That's not an accident or a cost-cutting measure. It's the whole point of the system, because water is weight, and weight on a ship is a serious engineering consideration across millions of flushes per voyage. But here's the thing that really flips the picture. The vacuum doesn't care about gravity. That pipe carrying your contribution doesn't need to go down. It can run horizontally, it can go around corners. On some configurations, it runs upward. The pressure differential does the work regardless of direction, which is the only reason a ship with 15 passenger decks stacked in every direction can run a coherent plumbing network at all. Gravity plumbing on a vessel this complex would be an engineering nightmare. The vacuum solves it in half a second every single time without the passenger ever giving it a thought. Which means your flush just traveled somewhere you'd never think to look. The pipe feeds into a collection network converging on the lower service decks, the parts of the ship most passengers never see, tucked behind machinery spaces and crew corridors. Everything from every cabin, every public restroom, every guest toilet on board flows towards the same destination, the treatment plant. Now, most passengers, if they think about this at all, assume the ship is quietly dumping raw sewage into the ocean. Reasonable suspicion. The ship is big, it's out at sea, the ocean is vast. But that assumption is about 20 years behind the actual engineering. The ship is running a sewage treatment plant. Not a simplified version, not a holding tank with some chemicals tipped in, a multi-stage biological treatment system that processes waste the same way a mid-sized city does, and in some respects, to a higher standard than older municipal infrastructure on land would deliver. Here's what your flush goes through before it goes anywhere else. Maceration first. The solids get ground down into a workable slurry. Then biological treatment, where aerobic bacteria break down the organic material in aeration tanks. This is the same core process a municipal wastewater facility uses, just compressed into a vessel currently somewhere in the Caribbean, running a dinner service 3 decks up. After the biology does its work, filtration, then UV sterilization, the most common method, or in some configurations, chemical disinfection, to bring pathogen levels down to regulatory thresholds. The output, the treated effluent, has to meet specific limits for bacterial counts and suspended solids before it can legally go overboard. A large ship carrying 4,000 or 5,000 passengers and crew generates somewhere in the range of 200,000 gallons or more of combined wastewater every single day. The treatment plant handles all of it, around the clock for the entire voyage, while you're at dinner, while the show is running, while the pool deck is full. The ship is not just a floating hotel. It is a floating hotel with a small city sewage infrastructure running invisibly in its basement, and most people walk past the door to it every day without registering what's behind it. Which raises the obvious question, where does the treated water go after that? Out to sea, but not whenever the ship feels like it. MARPOL Annex 4, the International Maritime Treaty governing vessels' sewage discharge, sets the baseline. A ship with a certified advanced treatment plant can discharge treated effluent without a hard distance restriction from shore under international rules, but that's just the floor. Coastal states can layer on far stricter requirements.
The Baltic Sea is a designated special area where discharge is prohibited entirely unless the treatment system meets an even higher standard. Regional no-discharge zones, port authority rules, and local environmental requirements add further layers on top. The specifics shift by jurisdiction and itinerary, which is why the ship carries a waste management plan that functions as a choreographed geographic schedule, and why the answer to where does it go depends entirely on where on the map you are at that moment. Because there are stretches of every voyage where none of it can go anywhere. The ship simply can't discharge it. No discharge zones, protected coastal areas, harbor approaches, sensitive marine environments cover significant portions of most cruise itineraries. When the ship is transiting those areas, the treated effluent accumulates in holding tanks, large ones sized for the voyage. The ship carries this accumulation the way a long-haul driver accounts for fuel stops, holding it until the route opens up and a discharge window becomes available. At some ports, facilities can accept a direct pump-out to shoreside treatment infrastructure, though that's not universal. Alaska is the clearest example of a region with particularly strict requirements. Ships there must carry certified advanced wastewater treatment systems meeting state-level standards that exceed the federal baseline. Those rules exist because monitoring in the 90s and early 2000s found that cruise ship discharges, including legal ones, were producing far higher levels of contamination than expected. The sophisticated system you're flushing into today is, in significant part, what regulatory consequence looks like after 2 decades of enforcement and engineering investment. The residual solids, the sludge the biological treatment process produces, don't go overboard either. They move through onboard incinerators or get containerized for port offload. Nothing from this system leaves unaccounted for. Which brings up a question most people have around this point. What about everything else going down your drains? The shower, the bathroom sink, the galley? That's a parallel system running alongside the one you just flushed into. Gray water, sinks, showers, laundry, spa, and pool drains has its own loop treated separately or merged into the same advanced system depending on the vessel's configuration. Galley gray water gets a grease trap stage first because restaurant drainage is its own category of problem. Every drain on board feeds into a treatment hierarchy with its own regulatory requirements. The toilet is just the most dramatic point of entry. And here's the part that tends to surface when people start thinking through all of this. Every bit of it runs on one networked vacuum infrastructure, not fixture by fixture, one system serving the whole ship, powered by vacuum generators running in the machinery spaces below.
When those generators fail, the toilets stop. Not one toilet, every toilet on the affected loop, sometimes across the entire ship. Maintenance responds immediately because there is no situation on a cruise ship that moves from inconvenience to genuine operational problem faster than inoperable bathrooms. Some ships carry redundant vacuum capacity precisely for this contingency. Cruisers who have been through a vacuum failure tend to remember it as one of the more memorable experiences of their sailing life for entirely self-evident reasons. One failure point, system-wide consequence. That's the trade-off for a network that can route a pipe uphill. So here's where you are now, standing in your cabin after pressing that button. A vacuum network pulled waste horizontally across the ship's lower decks. It joined a continuous flow from thousands of other fixtures. A multi-stage treatment process, biological, filtration, disinfection, brought the output to regulated standards. The treated effluent then went into holding tanks or overboard, depending on the ship's position on the itinerary, according to a discharge schedule that was already planned long before you boarded. The whole time, you were at brunch. That sound, the whoomp, is the system announcing itself, the vacuum valve opening, the network doing in half a second what took considerable engineering ingenuity to make work reliably inside a moving building with no fixed relationship to gravity. Next time you hear it on a sailing, you'll know exactly what just started. The pressure differential pulled your contribution sideways across 3 service decks. It joined the flow. The treatment plant processed it. The discharge schedule consulted the map and made its own call.
It is not a toilet attached to a drain. It is the entry point to a continuous treatment operation running at city scale, invisible below the waterline, for the entire length of your vacation.
That's another one for the cruise files. If you want to learn more about what goes on behind the giant cruise ships, everything from the scams on board to the secrets below deck, subscribe, like, and share. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.